Welcome back. The title of this mini lecture is Imperial Rome, Part 2. And we're going to talk about 5 terms that, as you read more about the complexities of Rome, use these as a basic guide to kind of get yourself started. They're, the understandings of the history of both Republican Rome and Imperial Rome are really complex, and there's a lot going on there. So, this is just a primer of a couple basics, more than anything. So, that being said, let's kind of get into it. So, the first term for us is the Colosseum, right? So the Colosseum, in the city of Rome itself, is something that we're talking about a construction in the first century, around 70 to 80 or so, right? Slaves are central to the construction of this, and the money from wars. And when it of course debuts, it really reflects a lot of things, right? It reflects the urban sort of focused nature of Roman life, the public spectacle sort of focused nature of Roman life and culture. In the last 20 years, with the ubiquity of films like Gladiator and others, there's been a want for modern society to kind of compare modern athletics to what gladiators had to undergo. This, of course, isn't true. The two are maybe similar but not the same, right? Colosseums are space for public athletics and performance. But of course, Rome in the 1st and 2nd and 3rd centuries is a far more violent society and space than anything that we can imagine, despite the difficulties that we may have. The Colosseum itself and those who attended these spectacles and events, right? There's of course a culture all its own. In terms of the crowds that are present there, from individuals whose job it was essentially to warm up the crowd, to even the kinds of foods or concessions that might have been offered. You would see other amphitheaters and performance spaces and forms of colosseums, or arenas, throughout the empire. But of course, the Colosseum in Rome, kind of is the one that folks tend to focus on. All right, this brings us to our second point, aqueducts. So there is, of course, a desire in the part of folks in the West often to sort of center Rome as sort of this great and grand place where everything was created and everything was developed and nobody else ever did it, if but for the Romans. And the Roman aqueducts are a really, really fascinating thing. You're going to have, by the 1st and early 2nd centuries, demographic shifts that lead to about at least 1 million people within the city of Rome, meaning you've got to get a whole lot of fresh water if you're going to provide any sanitation for those individuals. And so the aqueducts were the infrastructure to be able to facilitate fresh water coming in. And so you have these long, slowly grading, sort of half-open spaces, that bring these things in with the arches, that come from throughout the empire, and to also meet the demands, the water demands of other Roman cities as well. A number of these are still left. You can see the architectural construction and the emphasis on the arches. An example of this might be Pont du Gard in southern France. Again, these are going to be able to fuel the fresh water needs of the city, from the public baths to the fountains and just about anything. Now, in terms of the time period of the construction of these, 300s BCE, right, for early construction of these into the early 200s, certainly. All right, this brings us to our third term, the Via Appia, or Appian Way. All right, so one of the interesting sort of innovations and important aspects of understanding the imperial might of Rome is certainly going to be its infrastructure again, and another thing to look at with that would be its roads. So the Via Appia, or the Appian Way, which began its construction around the year 312, and its initial sort of construction was finished there, going out of the city around the Pontine Marshes, down and over and turning to Capua. Part of this is to be able to get troops out, because there's a war going on right at that particular time. The censor at the time, right, Appius Claudius Sacus, right, this, they want to be able to get soldiers from point A to point B very quickly, but there's, of course, a lot of other implications for the constructions of these kinds of roads, and these kinds of roads that are leveled and paved, right? So you have the flattened road, you have the gravel, you have these interlocking stones, and the gravel kind of put, everything locked together. They're going to, of course, have a very, very, very long life as a result of this. Now, the Appian Way will, of course, be extended, through time. And it's relatively famous, of course, throughout the periods of both Republican and imperial history, not just for the movement of troops, but for spectacles that occur along it. So, for example, in the days of Spartacus and the slave revolt, the crucifixion of the near 6,000 enslaved peoples. As a result of that, all of them were displayed along the Appian Way. Again, roads are important not only for troops, but important for, of course, the economy and movement and migration and all of that as well. Now, maintenance of the roads, of course, in the post-Roman world, right, that's a whole other story, which brings in sort of post-Roman kingdoms and states and all of that. And, of course, sections of the Via Appia are still around actually today, and folks can see them. This brings us to our fourth point, the Roman Forum, or even Trajan's Forum later. So, of course, the center of the city, right, you're going to have this space where folks can gather, where there's going to be speeches, where there's going to be markets and economy and all of this in the public to sort of come together. And the Roman Forum is going to be kind of the space for that. Much of the remnants of it, you can still see parts of that today within the center of the city of Rome itself. And again, from the basic initial temples and so the initial markets and things, there would be these grandiose other ones that are going to be built on top of it. So Trajan's Forum in the 2nd century would be a good example of that. This brings us to our fifth point. So this is the Pantheon, all right, the Pantheon in Rome. So you're looking 1st century in terms of the construction. You're looking for its rebuilding and development by the early 2nd century. So from the time of somebody like Agrippa and all that at the early 1st century and all that to the early 2nd century. Now the Pantheon, initially a temple, is going to pretty early on become a Christian church, and it's going to continuously be a Christian church up until even now. And so the building itself is famous partly because of its plans, its architecture, the concrete dome, which is really beautiful. That there's part of that. Another part of it is just that it's still around. It's been in continuous use. You can go and see it. It is quite a marvel for its day or even now. And it's helpful for us to understand certainly Roman architecture and life, certainly the imperial development in the city and the growth and all of that. Certainly also the role of Roman temples and complexes and also the early Christian church. So it has a lot of implications. Thank you very much.